These quotes offer a glimpse into Charles Darwin's ideas and philosophies, showcasing his contributions to evolutionary theory, observations on human nature, and reflections on life and society. Each quote invites further contemplation and highlights Darwin's significant impact on scientific and philosophical thought. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. In the struggle for survival, the fittest win out at the expense of their rivals because they succeed in adapting themselves best to their environment. I have called this principle, by which each slight variation, if useful, is preserved, by the term natural selection. The love for all living creatures is the most noble attribute of man. It is the long history of humankind, and animal kind too, that those who learn to collaborate and improvise most effectively have prevailed. The mystery of life is not a problem to be solved but a reality to be experienced. The mystery of the beginning of all things is insoluble by us, and I for one must be content to remain an agnostic. Ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. To kill an error is as good a service as, and sometimes even better than, the establishing of a new truth or fact. It is not enough to succeed. Others must fail. I love fools' experiments. I am always making them. The more one thinks, the more one feels the hopeless immensity of man's ignorance. The very essence of instinct is that it's followed independently of reason. It is not until we see the whole picture that we can understand the true nature of things. A scientific man ought to have no wishes, no affections, a mere heart of stone. The highest possible stage in moral culture is when we recognize that we ought to control our thoughts. Freedom of thought is best promoted by the gradual illumination of men's minds, which follows from the advance of science. I am not apt to follow blindly the lead of other men. It is always advisable to perceive clearly our ignorance. If the misery of the poor be caused not by the laws of nature, but by our institutions, great is our sin. The love of power is inherent in man. In the long run, the workman may be as necessary to his master as his master is to him, but the necessity is not so immediate. A moral being is one who is capable of reflecting on his past actions and their motives, of approving of some and disapproving of others. Man with all his noble qualities still bears in his bodily frame the indelible stamp of his lowly origin. Man with all his noble qualities, with sympathy which feels for the most debased, with benevolence which extends not only to other men but to the humblest living creature, with his godlike intellect which has penetrated into the movements and constitution of the solar system, with all these exalted powers, man still bears in his bodily frame the indelible stamp of his lowly origin. Man is descended from a hairy-tailed quadruped, probably arboreal in its habits. An American monkey, after getting drunk on brandy, would never touch it again, and thus is much wiser than most men. A man's friendships are one of the best measures of his worth. A man who dares to waste 1 hour of time has not discovered the value of life. It is not the conscience which raises a blush, for a man may sincerely regret some slight fault committed in solitude, or he may suffer the deepest remorse for an undetected crime, but he will not blush. We must, however, acknowledge, as it seems to me, that man with all his noble qualities still bears in his bodily frame the indelible stamp of his lowly origin. Man tends to increase at a greater rate than his means of subsistence. We can allow satellites, planets, suns, universe, nay whole systems of universes, to be governed by laws, but the smallest insect, we wish to be created at once by special act. I cannot persuade myself that a beneficent and omnipotent God would have designedly created parasitic wasps with the express intention of their feeding within the living bodies of caterpillars. I have long discovered that geologists never read each other's works, and that the only object in writing a book is a proof of earnestness. What a book a devil's chaplain might write on the clumsy, wasteful, blundering, low, and horribly cruel works of nature. False facts are highly injurious to the progress of science, for they often endure long, but false views, if supported by some evidence, do little harm, as every one takes a salutary pleasure in proving their falseness. To suppose that the eye with all its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, and for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection, seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest possible degree. It is not the strongest or the most intelligent who will survive but those who can best manage change,